Hello. Well, a year ago, nobody was walking around wearing masks, and it looked like we were going to have a nutcase anti-Semitic Labour Party taking over the government of this country. And the French government was telling the French people that they were being unnecessarily worried by Islamic extremism, which didn't really exist anyway. That all worked out well, didn't it? France has yet to do anything of note about the situation that's developed over there. I'm watching that with interest. But for the present, I'm going to be talking about the past British elections, the Labour Party, and what's going on in the USA, from my perspective anyway. In the case of Britain, it was a very dangerous corner we were negotiating in 2019, but we did get round it. Well, except for the masks, of course. Now, the people of the United States are negotiating the same sort of corner, although I have to admit that things seem to be in a far worse state over the Atlantic than they were here last year. The sort of civil disturbances that we had here in the UK aren't a patch on the full-scale riots and burnings that you guys have over there in the New World. But I do wish you luck in how your elections come out and in the aftermath, of course, because whoever wins, it's going to be a bumpy transition, isn't it? At present, it looks like the Democratic Party have encouraged a lot of rioting and looting and sort of, anti-white racism and stuff, because they know that Trump is in a no-win situation. If he does nothing, then they can say he doesn't care. But if he sends in the riot squads, the optics on bloodied heads and dead teenagers are going to be pretty terrible. So the Democrats seem to be quite satisfied with the situation, at least the top layer of them. I'm absolutely convinced that if Trump wins within very short order, we're going to see some reining in on those riots, possibly some very energetic reining in, or possibly on the mayors and local governors who allow them. But the problem is that Trump might not win. I don't think that's a certainty, but it's still a possibility. And part of the reason for that would be Trump's own fault. He didn't do anything about the big tech and the communications giants, did he? He let people like Alex Jones and others get thrown to the wolves. He didn't try to sort that little problem out. And now he's in a fight for his political life. And not just him. Not his political life, the political soul of the USA hangs in the balance. If Biden wins, well, the Democrats, or at least their voters, probably think that the riots will stop. And then they'll be able to establish their new democratic order. They'll do their best to make it impossible for the Republicans ever to gain ground again, to which end they'll invent 2 more states with democratic voting patterns, and they'll add more judges to the Supreme Court to swing it to their own political stripe. However, I don't think the Democrats will be able to control the situation. It won't turn out the way they think it will. They won't be able to stop the civil unrest, which by now has probably got a momentum of its own. It's a monster, and they created it, but it's far beyond their ability to direct anymore. It's a depressing thought, but the probability is that they'll end up having to do exactly what I think Trump will do if he gets in for a second term. And well, that's my prediction from my distance over here. But I can offer you some hope because, as I said, we over here have been through exactly the same turmoil, if not in quantity, at least in quality. In the UK, the big race issue was anti-Semitism. In the USA, it's anti-whiteism, but it amounts to the same thing. The direction of the anger of a certain type of susceptible malcontent is being pushed by a political elite who see this as a way of gaining power. it was touch and go over here for a while, but then it turned out that the mass of the British people had too much common sense either to be pushed into that sort of racist extremism or to be convinced that one particular group is responsible for all their problems. I have hopes then that the American people will make the same type of decision, but it's not going to be easy. Over here, and just within the past couple of days, the Labour Party is now in a ferment. Jeremy Corbyn, the man who engineered the downfall of that great party, and it was a great party, it had some great ideas. I may not have personally agreed with the answers they thought they had to the problems of any large society, but they did have honesty once. But Jeremy Corbyn changed all that, and he allowed an anti-Semitic minority to dominate the politics he was pushing. And he's now been shoved into the sidelines by having the whip removed. Now, for those of you who don't know what that's all about, it's as follows. The political parties have officials known as whips. They're called that because they're doing essentially the same job of herding the party faithful as the people who are controlling the hounds on the hunt. But the whips do more than just herd. They also pass out information, sometimes insider information. They notify members of parliament about meetings and press opportunities, things like that. They're very important to the MPs. And when an MP has the whip removed, well, he or she is still an MP, but flying blind thereafter. And such MPs aren't invited to meetings, briefings, party events, that sort of thing. They don't get the handouts, and they won't get the insider information and press releases. The whip is taken away usually only in instances where the Member of Parliament has been toweringly disloyal in some way. In Corbyn's instance, no sooner had the new leader, Keir Starmer, made a speech confessing that the Labour Party has been very remiss in its attitude to the Jews within its ranks. No sooner had he done that than Corbyn gave an interview, and in it he insisted that there'd been next to nothing wrong with the Labour Party, and that the very few instances of anti-Semitic bullying or prejudice were, well, far too trivial even to make a fuss about. I was very surprised when within hours of that he was out on his ear. I mean, it was like within the hour, I think. I suppose that Starmer reckons he has to show his strength because the quizzing he got after his speech was almost universally hostile. That was another thing that surprised me. Usually the press throw the Labour Party softballs, but not this time. The press were actually asking hard questions like, why didn't you do anything at the time, for instance? Which is a good question because Starmer was notably in the background when all that fuss was going on last year. However, better late than never, I suppose. The fact is, though, when Starmer was making his speech and saying how much he wanted to reform the party so that all those people who'd left would feel comfortable about coming back, it did occur to me that he has much more of a problem than just bringing Jeremy Corbyn to heel. The point is that the core Labour vote used to be in the old industrial towns, which have in large part a substantial population of Muslims, mostly of Pakistani origin or ancestry. Not all, and not all of them are Muslims, of course, but there are quite a lot of them, relatively speaking, and many of them are from really peasant backgrounds, and that doesn't help either. And they came to work in the industries that needed post-war manpower. And they settled into communities in these towns and, well, voted Labour, you might say, religiously. They didn't used to be quite so extreme either religiously or politically. But what happened was, starting around the 60s, I suppose, or the 70s, the kingdoms of Saudi Arabia and Qatar started spending a lot of their oil money funding mosques and sending out imams trained in their territory. And these people had some very extreme Middle Eastern attitudes. And that meant that a whole generation of people of Pakistani heritage have been indoctrinated in the most intense and fundamentalist attitudes. So instead of assimilating or at least integrating, these communities became more religious and more separated from the mainstream. Of course, satellite TV didn't help, because that way there are people who just watch Pakistani TV and they don't know anything at all about the British culture by which they're surrounded. They just live in a little Pakistani world of their own. Anyway, the Labour Party took these Pakistani communities on, and pretty soon the local constituency organisations realised that they'd gain more headway with these groups if they maintained an anti-Jewish attitude. And eventually this attitude, worked its way up the whole height of the Labour Party. Starmer, well, it looks like he's trying to reverse that. I wish him luck, because it's not just a matter of changing a few people at the top levels anymore. It's going to be a matter of changing the root and branch of the party. There are many Labour MPs who were saying things last year. They've stopped saying them now, but we know what their attitudes are. And they're of the most primitive possible to know about. And I'm not sure it's even possible to deal with this anymore. But then, look, Saudi Arabia is starting to change its politics, so who knows? Maybe they'll send out diktats to their imams about what they should and should not be saying. Meanwhile, this whole turnaround might offer some hope to you guys who wish for some peace within the borders of the United States. Assuming, of course, that the United States has any borders. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo, with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com, and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.